Welcome to Get Her, celebrating women who rise, thrive, and inspire with Amber and Jeanette.
It could have went different ways. We could have made different choices, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like to be sitting with you today, sharing this space and the women we are today and the choices we made to keep showing up, right? And then coming together to share in that. But as you're sharing your journey, it just is showing, all of the things that you needed to go through to get to where we are today, right? And like celebrating that woman, but also sharing that life wasn't easy, like these things that came up and identifying your mama and the things that she still needed to work through. And then being able to, like, maybe not a full forgiveness, but an understanding, right? And then taking that and being able to, I always feel like for me in my healing journey, whenever I feel the need to then share, is when I feel like I've then up leveled. And not that it's like, there's no like game. It's not like a game in healing because it never ends as we find different parts and pieces of us that we're ready to heal. But it's like it allows this space of like, oh, I'm ready to share. Like when I feel like pouring out of me and I need to share this info, is that that you've healed one part of you, that you now can share that with other women so that they can heal. And I can feel that like thread as you're sharing of just like as you're maneuvering through these things and you're able to like get stronger and stronger and stronger in your own healing to then share that with other women for them to do the same thing. Right. And I feel like the story is so relatable in some way, shape, or form that, it may not be the exact thing, but you sharing your story is going to allow that space for many women to do the same. And I love you. I
Oh,
love
I love you. I know, I was just thinking, like, as you were talking and saying all that, like, we just truly never know what people go through, right? And, like, some of these women were just like, wow, they just have it so easy. Like, they're doing the thing and they make it look so easy. But, like, we never know what people went through to get to where they're at or what they're currently going through. I mean, look at all
you.
the stuff that you did after losing your parents both back to back in such a short period of time and going through that grieving process and then still being able to rise and to do the damn thing and embrace retreats and all of the stuff. And so I vulnerability is something that's been very new to me, which I love vulnerability now. It was a very scary concept for the longest time, right? And seeing you like on that second episode we did when I was interviewing you and like hearing your story. I mean, I've heard your story before in a more private setting, but then to hear it on the podcast and stuff like that, I was like, wow, like that's inspiring to me. Like she's telling her story and I don't even know if you planned on telling it. Um like just like I mean just like I said when you interviewed me there were things that came out of my mouth and I was like, oh, like I guess I didn't really plan on saying that. I didn't plan on talking about that
Sharing it.
just yet, and it just came out and it was just like, and then we get done with it, right? And it's like, wow, that was healing in its own sense. And when we were recording we don't plan on that being a healing session or
No, and
anything
I think
else,
that you
but
can
it's just
like
like, damn.
plan it. Yeah. I think that like even if you did plan it, it wouldn't come across the same, right? Like we don't know what is going to come through. And I think when our story is ready to be told, right, then it just kind of comes out. But it's also that safe space that we create. And I feel like I'm really looking at like feeling into energies and spaces and places, right? Of like protecting our energy. And we talked about this before in like career paths and the ways that we're showing up and how we're supporting others. But it's also when we share our story and we're in a safe space with the right people and the right sisters and being surrounded, is that it actually feels lighter. Like you're like,
Hmm.
oh, and it's that's the feeling that we want to create where it's like it doesn't matter what the story is, and that it's honoring that courage to speak a
Hmm.
truth. And we talk in, a lot of different trainings and stuff that I have done is that they talk about like big T traumas and little T traumas. But really, when you're like defining a trauma, what is something to one person is different to another, right? Everyone experiences
Mm-hmm.
things differently. So I think in creating this space, to like to then just like it's like relief, like I just feel that, like I'm like, you feel
Yeah.
lighter, you know, and creating that space. And I feel like that's what we've done with each other, right? Is
Mhm.
that, you know, our first deep dive conversation when we met, you know, I was like, I picked you, but I was like,
I know that went
it's like
really
that.
deep. I was like, oh, I love this.
Right. I was like, our first, yeah, I was just reminded of that, like one of those memes where it's like in adults, you just like pick a human and be like, we're gonna be friends. And I was like, no, but I
Hmm.
did do that. But our conversation that night was just like, let me tell you, like it was like we didn't have enough time. They were the
Right.
long versions of those stories. That was like, let me tell you all the things about me, right? And
Hmm.
I feel like that is so empowering and to be open to receive that too, right? Like to
Yeah.
be in a place of your healing journey that you're ready to use your voice, but you're also sharing it in these like deep dive, like profound conversations, like forming this deep connection, you know. And then with us, you know, we were blessed to go to the retreat after and really dive deeper and support each other in workshops. And, you know, just by eating breakfast and having fun, you know, we got to really like dive into that friendship and that connection. Which, you know, I really feel like if we're doing this now with each other, you know, that we can hold that space for other women to come into the space and be able to share no matter what it is, right? It can be
Hmm.
something simple. It doesn't always have to be these like huge things. It could just be like, you know, like from disagreements to miscommunications and things like that
Hmm.
too, that
Yeah.
we suffer from. Like these things become heavy because maybe we didn't show up in our best light or how we felt we wanted to in a certain space, or we got triggered and all of our modalities went out the window, you know. And coming back to that space, you know, that that's okay too, that it's you can share anything, right, without judgment. And you know, sometimes it's just about venting and releasing, you know, when you're
Mhm.
ready, because it's okay. It's okay. As long as we like, to me, I feel like as long as you're learning from these things and you're seeing the patterns, you're forgiving yourself and then just being better by doing the things, reaching out to your
Mhm.
sisters together to get her, right? Like we
Yeah.
just keep moving through this journey of healing. Like it never
Hmm.
stops. But when you
Hmm.
get to like share this with so many powerful, empowered women, you know, we never do anything alone anymore. And
Yeah.
before, maybe we didn't see that. So it's like,
Hmm.
it just feels so good and so supported. And I feel like we're going to talk forever. We finally remembered to keep recording. So we probably have half of another episode.
Oh, we do have half of
Love
another
this.
episode. I was thinking that like as you're talking, I'm like, oh, this is our next episode, vulnerability. Hell yes. But
I
you
think
know, going
so.
back to like what you were saying about like we can't define trauma. Like your trauma is completely different to mine. And I remember like even as kids, I felt like everything was competition. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you thought that was bad? Well, here, like maybe you should hear about my day or what happened to me or and it was like, oh, who had the worst day or whatever. But, and I used to do that too, like with my abuse. Like what happened to me wasn't near as bad as what has happened to other people. So my story doesn't matter. What happened to me doesn't matter. Um, there's way worse things that have happened out there. At least I'm alive. At least this, at least that, like in so many things. Like even for the longest time, I was like, maybe I'm making this up. Like I had myself convinced that I was making it up in my head. And your body's not gonna, first of all, your body's gonna tell you, like, no, you're not making this up. Like,
Of
this
course.
legit happened. And I've been
Yeah.
holding it into my body, like, I've been holding it in my body for so long, right? But then when I finally came to realization, I'm like, well, I don't want to make a big deal about this. Like, other women have been through way worse things. But the thing is like, that's my trauma. And yes, that is true that other women have gone through more difficult
Yeah.
things. But why am I minimizing my trauma? Why am I
Well,
minimizing
that's,
that? Because
yeah.
it's still mine, it's still deep, it still affected who I was and how I was showing up in the world. And it's part of my story. And it's also part of the story that created the disempowered story that I was living. And then it was when
Mm,
I finally decided to take that control to rewrite it. But
yeah.
I feel like, especially as women, we tend to downplay our traumas. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the one to be like, oh, you were traumatized. I'm not going to tell another person that. But, um, I'm not the type of person, and I tend to find that I'm now surrounding myself with more people who are very similar to me, where if you came to me and told me, oh my gosh, I had the worst thing that happened to me today. And I was like, okay, tell me. My car wouldn't start and I was late for work. Oh, well, you think that's bad? No, I would never say that. Like, that's terrible. I'm sorry that that happened to you, and I'm still going to hold space and honor the
Yeah.
fact that to you, that was something that was very bad. Because who knows what the additional part of that story was?
Everything else, right?
I
The
could have lost
icing
my
on the
job.
cake.
Huh?
Yeah. That's like the icing on the cake, though. Like, oh, the
Oh
car
yeah.
wouldn't start, but it was there multiple other things leading up to that that made that be like what's that saying? Like the straw that broke the camel's
Mhm.
back. Is that something,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yep,
that's
yep.
the thing, right? And then, even to just add on to what you're saying about traumas is like it's like the trauma bonding of like
Hmm.
the one up, right? And I think when women started to use their voices, right? Like we started telling our stories when we felt that space, it was trauma bonding. So it's like there wasn't that like safe space to hold. It was just like we have the same thing. How can we? It was is meant, I think, intuitively meant to help, like how women used to sit in circles before and they would share their stories. But I think there was a time where women were just learning our voices in abuse settings and in these things and spaces and places that it was like retelling the story like the trauma wheel, right? Like we're bonded
Hmm.
together because of this trauma, and then you're not one-upping each other, but you're staying in that energy.
Hmm.
And I feel like in terms of like us sharing and these stories that are coming through and you even holding that space for a car not starting or and it's that authentically being able to hold space. Like it's not about you. It's not for you. Like I don't
Hmm.
mean you as a human, but
Right,
I mean like
right.
whoever is sharing, right?
Hmm.
It's not about us to then offer judgment, to offer advice, or even sometimes it's just to hold the space. And maybe
Hmm.
there's more to uncover underneath that. But I also think now, in terms of like, and I think, if you want to add on to this too, in like the rising, thriving, and the inspiring and giving that voice is like, it's about ending the patterns. Like the story gets to stop here. We get to rewrite a new story.
Hmm.
We don't have to just bond because we have a
Hmm.
similar trauma or we relate because of a trauma. It's about thriving, inspire, like we get to come together and we get to release that limiting
Hmm.
belief, those beliefs that we've been holding on to that have, crafted so much of our existence, and held us back in so many ways. Whereas now, when we're able to come together in these safe spaces without judgment, without any of it, we can actually just like let it go and then fill it with the inspiration and doing the things and who do we get to
Hmm.
be together,
Yeah,
right? Like it's like we get
yeah.
to flip that script, and just like adding on to that too, and how you are even identifying that, holding that space, right?
Hmm.
Your car not starting, but what happens if you're here in Canada and so I feel like your weather's kind of the same and it's minus, it's minus a million outside and I can't find my car keys, or these little things that really are big things on top of other
Hmm.
things. It doesn't always have to be these things. And it's like, just because you had one bad day, it's not a bad life, right? Like, it's
Right.
like, and it's also flipping that script too to be like, these things happen for me. So maybe by being late, you actually missed an accident. Maybe
Yeah.
there's all these other ways that we can,
Hmm.
and I know that you teach this within your, holding space in the transformation and your coaching too, is that it's when we remove those limiting beliefs, we can really see and get to those spaces that everything happens for us, not to us, right? And
Yeah.
it's like we just have to change our belief and our views on life, right? Like we can, and
Hmm.
yes, don't get me wrong, I've lost my keys, I've misplaced, I've done all of the things. And it's the reaction to it. And in the moment, you're still going to be a human from time to
Hmm.
time.
Oh
It's okay to be like, I had the worst day ever, and you blow
yeah.
it up into something, and that's okay. But if that right now in that moment, the worst thing that you feel you were dealing with was losing your keys or being late for work, what a blessing,
Yeah.
and it's not in comparison to anything else. It's just like, oh, I have a lesser lesson to learn. right? Like I get to learn this at this capacity instead of like, it's just our mindset. How are we receiving these messages and these lessons in life to make us, look at ourselves, right? And hold that space for ourselves or reach out to someone else to share that story and that messaging, right? It's just like the lesser. It's always like, I changed my views recently and I'm just like, this is something I'm working with is that any lesson that I learn that feels so heavier, I'm just like, why me, is that
Mhm.
I'm like, this is the lesser lesson than what it could have been. And then I'm
Yes.
grateful, right? So it's like flipping that
Mhm.
switch to like be grateful for the things that are showing up in your life because they always could be worse, right? They really could be. And they
Right.
also could be less. So celebrate what they are.
Right. Right. Well, and I think too, like, I mean, it, like you said, it goes back to like flipping the script, right?
Yeah.
And I love and this was new to me, the things don't happen to you, they happen for you. And what can you find in the fog, in the dark, to help you? Like, what lesson is being learned here? Or flipping the script, and like you said, oh, my car didn't start, but then there was an accident on the way to work and I could have been in that accident.
Yep.
Or, there's so many different ways to do it. And just thinking, well, what's the positive side of the story? I felt the
Mm.
negative. And part of that too is, feeling the feelings but not becoming the feelings, right? Allowing yourself to feel them, but don't sit in them for too long. Don't become them. Because what we do then is like something bad happens to us, and then we sit in those bad feelings, and then that attracts more bad things to happen, right? Um, so feeling them, but then also, okay, I felt the bad feelings. I'm mad. I missed work. But what are the positives? And again, maybe I missed a big accident, or maybe
Yeah.
this job, maybe that's the universe saying, girl, you're not supposed to be at this job. I lost my job because I was late for work. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe that's not what my calling was. Now it sucks. I lost my job, but now what can I do? Now where am I
Yeah.
supposed to be? And being able to have that faith and ask for the guidance and all of the things. um and then um there's something else I wanted to say, and I feel like I'm drawing a blank now. But just going back to that vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is scary, and being able to have that space and know, like, I have a space to go to and I can tell my story and nobody's going to minimize my story. Because
Mm.
that's why vulnerability was so scary for me for the longest time. I didn't tell my story because I'm like, oh, well, my story is not that bad. When I compare it to the stories of others, my story isn't that bad. Um, and so I wouldn't tell it. But then when I found spaces where I could tell my story and people held space and they were like, wow, you've been through shit and you've survived it and you've came through it and now you're inspiring others to do the same thing. I was like, oh wow, so my story does matter. And that's what I want to be able to give to other women is no matter what, like your story matters and it's going to inspire the shit out of somebody. Maybe not everybody. And you might come across those people who are like, oh my gosh, but did you die? And I hate that. I say it sometimes like
Yeah.
joking around, but like reality of it is I hate that. Um, but yeah, just being able to have that space and no matter what, you're going to be seen, you're going to be heard, and space is going to be held for you. Like that's huge.
I love that. And I also feel like even just, I don't know if it's just like the age or like of women, that we're getting, this is just me personally, but I'm getting to this place that I want to share. Like I've now surrounded myself with these beautiful souls that, I really feel like we deep dive and I trust in the universe to bring me those that I'm meant to be connected with, that are here to help me through this journey. And, like I did many retreats because I really do walk that walk, but I was gifted before my mama passed away. I not only hosted retreats, but I also ended up going to an ayahuasca retreat, which is a plant medicine retreat. But I didn't know at that time the women that were going to show up, that were going to be part of this next journey moving forward, right? And that's without me even telling the story of the things that I was doing, like that was before my parents passed, and there was still tons of things that came up in that space, in that place, right? And then going through this significant loss, but little did I know that in those things that I was doing up leading up to before my mama had passed, that I was like calling in all of, by being vulnerable, I was calling in all these women that were seeing me, right? And I was sharing this story, and now grief is now a part of my life, right? Like we walked hand
Mhm.
in hand.
Mhm.
um I'm not at this place that I celebrate her because she still causes a lot of pain, but I'm able to look at things as, oh, the memories that come up, or to unpack things, unpack that anger, unpack these things and realize that it is just grief, right? And like you were saying too, with the emotions, like not to like stay in them, but it's like when you look at emotions as like a wave, right? And it's the
Mhm.
same thing we talk about in plant medicine too, is like the only way the only way to get out it is to get through, right? Like we have to go through that. And the same as
Mhm.
like, we have to get through the muck to get to like when they think of like the lotus flower that like grows in the mud, this is what I'm thinking of. And it's like you have to like get through that, right? Like there's no way you can't bypass these things, right? And so what I'm learning in my healing journey is that the more I open up and I'm calling in these beautiful women that hold that space, then I'm able to share more. Like now, I just spoke on a radio show too, with a retreat host, and I did share the question she had asked me was similar to, what was something, a moment in your life where like, where you either dropped into your business or just like things had changed. And all of a sudden out of my mouth was like all these things that I was like, oh my goodness, like I didn't realize, like we talked about at the beginning. Like I was like, I kind of felt it. Like I was like, I think this is going to start to come through about my mama and about life. But it's like I share these things because it's not to be like, oh, poor me, like your parents passed. Yes. And like you, I'm like, well, everyone has deaths in their family. Everyone deals with these things, but it's like grief isn't something that is shared about openly in our communities and in corporate worlds and in these spaces, especially in the Western worlds,
Mhm.
right? So for me to just be like, and the reason I do share is because sometimes I'm not my best self. And I'm not saying that I want an excuse, but if someone is like, oh, she's grieving, oh, they may be able to support me in a way that I didn't know, or
Mhm.
just these friendships to have an idea of like, what am I going through? And it's easier to share that than to be like, oh, I'm having a bad day, And I was like, not that you want to have these excuses to like get out of responsibilities, but I think when we're vulnerable and we're sharing, like, what are you going through today? How are
Yeah.
you feeling today?
Yeah.
Right? That's going to allow this space and this healing space to have that support so that it is okay. And going back to the things we talked about too, of like a bad day, it's just a
Mhm.
bad day. It's not a bad life. Right. And it's like, I think really pulling in the supports of women that feel that can be there for you when you
Mhm.
are having a bad day, that you can pick
Yeah.
up the phone and be like, today's awful,
Yeah.
hold me, help me, bring me ice cream,
Mhm.
let's do something different to shift this mindset, or just
Mhm.
listen to me for a moment, or just sit with me,
Mhm.
right? And I think that is the movement of creating this space for women to really feel held, right? And
Yeah.
to share whatever part of their story, whatever part of you're in today. It doesn't take away because these things happened 20 years ago, right? Like sometimes memories and things resurface, especially in plant medicine spaces
Mhm.
and places. When you're conscious level, you're in a safe space that you're ready to receive that, right? And that
Mhm.
doesn't matter if it happened, 100 years ago. And we're learning through like lineage and our ancestors of things that we've carried that aren't even ours,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Oh
like
yeah.
just really diving into these things and like holding space, and there's so many layers of
Mhm.
how we could talk about releasing the traumas, the limiting beliefs, but more importantly, how can we support each other on the good
Mhm.
days, the bad days, and
Yeah.
celebrating is what I meant to
Yeah.
say, is like we need to celebrate the good days, because it's not, life isn't all about lessons and traumas. There's also like those lessons bring us to also the triumphs, right? Because
Mhm.
if these
Yes.
things didn't happen and you didn't go on these missions to find inner peace, like something called for you to take your first
Mhm.
coaching, right? Like you got to that place, you needed to get out of the bathtub and you needed to take this course, right? And sometimes we don't even know why, but it's just a fuck yes. And we sign up and we do the thing, right? And then we
Right.
realize after, or we end up a retreat and we're just like, I'm doing the thing. I'm here.
Mhm.
And we don't always even need to know why sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like this is where you're meant to be at this point in
Mhm.
time to feel a part of you, and I
Yeah.
think that is super, super important in the space that we get to hold, right? Like there's so
Mhm.
many layers. I think we could talk forever and
Oh my
ever and
gosh,
ever.
forever. We really could. And I mean, yeah, to it's okay to feel the things that we were told weren't okay to feel. It's okay to be sad. It's
Mm,
okay to grieve. It's okay to be mad and angry. Like all of those things. Like we don't always have to be happy go lucky, but being able to, again, feel the emotion, but don't become it, and to be able to get ourselves eventually like out of that anger, like where can that anger move you? And sometimes sadness and grieving in the coaching platform that I use, it's like a dimmer switch, right? Our emotions and our feelings, it's like a dimmer switch. You have to go through all of them. So you start at the very bottom where it's dark and the lights are off, and then you turn that switch up and it slowly gets brighter and brighter and brighter, right? It doesn't just go from dark to super super bright, super happy. And so, like, we have to go through those things to feel the shit, right? We got to do the
yeah.
things. And, sadness and grieving it goes into anger eventually. And then that anger, do we sit in that anger? No, we let that anger fuel us into action, into doing things, into moving forward. And, you're not always going to be way up here in the high brightness. We're humans. We're humans,
Yeah.
and we're going to find ourselves in the dark at some point, no matter how empowered we are. But the good thing is like we get to that empowered place and we know how to get out of the darkness faster. We know how to
Mm,
feel the feelings and give that to ourselves, and to be able to find the spaces and places that are going to hold us and support us. And we know how to get out of the dark faster. And that's
I love
huge because,
that.
again, those are all feelings. You have to feel those. You have to feel them. And they're normal to
Well,
feel. But we're told that we're
well,
not
it's,
supposed to, right?
Yeah, of course. And it's like we put things, it's like bypassing, which, it's easier. And I think you brought this up a lot too, and answering the questions is that, we compare ourselves, we minimize things. And then it's also like I've done this in the past too, of dealing with abusive relationships and, these things where it's like, why'd she stay for so long? Or she should have known better.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Yep.
and when you're disassociating and you're going through all these things at the time, you don't know what you're living through. And or you do know, you just your actions and your behavior, like nothing is matching, right? When you're in this like traumatic space, that it's easier to take these things and you put them in a box and you compartmentalize. I can't say that word. Compartmentalize.
Compartmentalize. I
Yes,
got you,
that's it.
girl.
Uh, I'm like, that didn't sound right. But we basically push them away. And I think that, a lot of people could relate to that, is that you take these things that you don't want to deal with and you're just constantly pushing them down until, what happened with me, with my parents and my past and relationships. And, I really resonate with a lot of the things that you shared too in the past, is like these patterns that keep coming up. Like we keep dating the same person. We're not learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my biggest healing is always to take courses to learn, to really dive into the why or how is this happening, and then being able to share that information with others is like my biggest healing, and in traumas and things like that. But then after, I was starting to see the light and I was like, okay, I can do the thing. Life is going to be beautiful. I'm starting
Mm-hmm.
this new business. I've got all these things. And then with the passing of my parents, it's like I can't. There is no, everything is overflowing, right? And I can't put it in the box anymore, right? And then we get to that place, but it doesn't have to be like that, right? Like it doesn't have to, but it takes us sometimes this intense loss or whatever it might be for us to then look at everything else and really identify, wow, I didn't unpack these other things, and my box, everything, it's overflowing. I
Yeah.
don't have the capacity anymore to keep putting it in a box. You get to that place, but what a gift could it be, you know, if we were able to hold that space, that it didn't have to overflow. You didn't have to get to this place where it's like overflowing and you're at this place of freeze where you can't do anything, right? Like you get to this place, and this is in my personal journey, as I got to that place where like I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't, and what I chose to do in my healing, I didn't turn to substances, and I didn't turn to anything like that, is I poured energy into my business, and I traveled and I retreated because I needed this support in different ways. And that's what I created, was these women all over the planet, right? So
Mhm.
to have that support, I didn't have immediate family or community that I felt that would bring that same support that I needed at this time. I just needed to be cared for. I needed love. And that's what these women, invited me to retreats and invited me to these spaces and places, but it wasn't until even then, I missed a flight one time, which is the first time in like, my whole career is travel, and I've never missed a flight. I missed a flight. I left a hairbrush in Miami. I did silly things that were, until like the universe was like, okay, like you need to go, you need to deal with all the things now, right? But
Yeah.
it's like, if you could look back and be like, I looked at it and I was like, the universe then took all these things from me. So I had no choice. I couldn't get back on another plane. I had to face the things that were in front of me, because when we don't listen, it becomes extremes. They're
Hmm.
extremities, right? Like there was no other choices that you could make at that time. And then it's like when you start to, I always just say they're like breadcrumbs. When you start to like open up your healing, you're back into alignment, you receive, right?
Yeah.
So then you receive a new gift of, or a new human, or a new relationship or friendship, or something that is like
Hmm.
there to support you in this new way. So you're releasing the old. That cup isn't overflowing anymore. You're pouring more into the overflow of the abundance versus this like overwhelm, right? Where
Yeah.
you just like, the traumas get to be too heavy. We can only carry that cup for so long, right? And before
Hmm.
you just, it drops, and sometimes it smashes. And when it does, it's like, to pick up those pieces. I think for me, the blessing was all of the women and the sisters that I had worldwide, because I've created this beautiful community that no matter what time it is here in Eastern time, there is someone that is still awake at all, from India from Australia to India to, all of these beautiful spaces and places that I have these sisterhood, that there's always someone to connect with,
Yeah.
which I think is super beautiful, right? It's like, and as we start to do that transition, it's like the cup isn't as heavy either, right? Like you're able to like put it down and start to fill it. It's like
Hmm.
the overflow is then the abundance and the excitement, right? Of the creations and the inspiration and the places that we're showing up. Start to see, like, you were talking about like the darkness, right? Well, sometimes we go back there for a minute because you needed to learn something, or there's like a pattern that has come up and you have a choice, right? You can stay there
Hmm.
in that darkness, in that heaviness, or you go there for a minute, be curious, witness, and then come back to the other side, right? To where you're building, you're thriving, there's hope, there's faith, there's all of
Hmm.
this beauty, right? And that there
Yeah.
still can be in our healing process in this journey, even though it's loss, right? It's abuse, it's traumas, it's
Hmm.
all these things that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to have had to live through, right? But it's like there can still be this light in that,
Yeah.
right? Of like, of
Mhm.
moving through. And yeah, wow. Hmm.
That was so beautiful. Speaking of moving through, I felt like that's what needed to come out. Like that just moved through so like fluently, and it was so perfect. It was so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, every opportunity is an or everything that happens to us is an opportunity to choose different, right?